Ambassador Susan Rice is a Washington heavyweight. She spent years working with President Barack Obama, becoming a vital voice in his administration.
Protest began outside of our consulate in Benghazi.
First as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, later as his national security advisor. Throughout it all, she's been tough and direct. Happens to have a lot to say about Washington now, in her own full-throated way.
Because Lindsey Graham isn't just a piece of now.
He's been a piece of
Lindsey Graham.
I said it.
She is back in the public eye.
We sure as hell need to agree that a hostile foreign power has no business messing with our elections.
Her new memoir is called Tough Love and chronicles her time on the front lines of American politics and what a battlefield that is. I met up with Ambassador Rice this weekend in Washington. Ambassador Rice, thank you very, very much. Really, really appreciate this. Congratulations on the Nationals, I think.
Thank you.
I gather this is very important to you.
Well, of course. Washington native, we have to celebrate these things.
It is precisely a year until the Americans go to the polls again. How do you feel now about where the country is at, 1 year out?
Well, I think that Democrats are likely to win. I think that the American people have seen a lot of Donald Trump now and much of the downside of his leadership, which is, rife with dishonesty, rife with self-interest, domestically and in terms of foreign policy. And, it's very hard to predict where the impeachment inquiry will end up. And whether or not that leads to removal, which I think is unlikely, I think it will deepen concerns among the American public.
How do you feel about this whole process happening a year out?
Look, I think I, like a lot of Democratic voters and Democratic members of Congress, came to the judgment belatedly an impeachment inquiry was necessary. When the Ukraine transcript came to light and the absolute clarity that it seems to demonstrate about the president's interests in, extorting dirt on a political rival, false dirt on a political rival, for his own personal gain, and to hold up congressionally approved military assistance to a country that needs it desperately because of Russian aggression. It's so outrageous. It's such an abuse of power.
There is a real divide in this country. And I think I was a bit taken aback because I know that it's very personal for people, the divisions, but I didn't know that you're experiencing the divisions within your own family. Your own son, Jake, is completely politically opposite from you.
And not completely, but he's a staunch conservative. And as I write in the book, there are areas where we agree. There are more areas where we disagree, particularly on domestic policy. But he's my son, and I'm very proud of him. I love him to death, just as I love my daughter, who's a bit younger and quite a bit to the left. So we've got a bit of both in our household. And my husband, Ian, and I are somewhat in the middle, trying to keep the food from flying at the dinner table.
Does it make you look at this country a little differently, though, with a bit more empathy for the divides?
I actually feel quite fortunate that I have an insight into how a substantial portion of people in this country are thinking. And I try to understand it and to be respectful of those differences. And so one of the gifts that our son Jake has given us is a broader perspective and a sense of urgency about the importance of trying to find common ground.
Do you think Americans are at this moment are able to reconcile those differences?
I think we have to. I refuse to bet against America's ability to grow and renew itself and to heal. And so, yes, this is a difficult time. Is it the most difficult? No way. Can we do it? Yes, but the nature of the challenges are somewhat different given this new political and media environment. If we don't confront these divisions with a sense of urgency and necessity, that they could be what undermines not only our global leadership, but our democracy.
As you know, Canada's relationship with China right now is really raw and not very good, and stemming largely from that arrest of Meng Wanzhou, the CEO. Should Canada have been asked to arrest her by the Americans?
I think yes. There was, I assume, significant evidence to suggest that she had committed a crime. What worries me, though, is then the way President Trump suggested, having asked for the arrest, that we might trade her at your expense, in the context of some trade negotiation, if it were beneficial in his estimation to get what we want in a trade deal. That's not right.
Knowing the Chinese leadership the way you do and the way it works, how does Canada get out of this?
I don't think Canada benefits from caving. And I realize that there are citizens who are in detention and that it's a very uncomfortable and unpleasant place to be. But in my experience, China will, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile when it comes to things of this sort.
What is the security risk to Canada if it does business with Huawei while the United States does not?
It's hard for me to emphasize adequately without getting into classified terrain how serious it is, particularly for countries that are part of the Five Eyes intelligence sharing network with the United States, so UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the US. For those countries in particular to be reliant on Huawei technology. It gives the Chinese the ability, if they choose to use it, to access all kinds of information, civilian intelligence, military, that could be very, very compromising. So much as I disagree with the Trump administration on a number of things, on this, their concern about Huawei, I believe they're right. And I believe they've handled it badly. There's all kinds of ways that they're doing things around this issue which are unhelpful. But on the very specific concern about Huawei, I think it's frankly quite justified.
In terms of the relationship between Canada and the United States and the rest of the Five Eyes, if Canada does business with Huawei in the future, as a matter of protection, would the United States have to have a slightly different security relationship with Canada?
Yes, and that will throw the Five Eyes collaboration, which serves the security interests of every Canadian and every American, into jeopardy. It can't be done.
Can't share.
I don't see how we can share in the way we have. It's not a joke. It's truly serious.
Your connections to Canada are very strong. Your husband, Ian, is a Canadian. He was a producer at this program. And yet I was surprised in reading your book the impact or the meaning of the moment of the death of Barbara Frum for your family.
Yeah. Ian was my husband, who was then my fiancé, was one of her senior producers on the Journal. And he was quite close to her. And through Ian, I'd gotten to know Barbara. And she was a real champion of our impending marriage and very enthusiastic about it. And about 3 or 4 months before we were due to get married, I kind of freaked out and I started to have real anxieties about whether or not I was ready to get married and could make that kind of commitment. We had been living together, moved out for a period of time. And one morning, as he's getting ready to fly back from South Africa, I wake up to CBC radio, as I always did, and the news comes on that Barbara Frum had died. And I was shaken and really saddened. And it made me realize that this was a relationship I wanted to be in for the rest of my life, that she was right about the fact that we were right together. And I had this sort of moment of being, this moment of clarity where I realized that I had to see if he would take me back. And I also had to tell him that Barbara had passed. So I tried to get him paged in the Johannesburg airport. And I guess they sent the message to come to one of those white courtesy telephones. And I said, honey, and we hadn't spoken in over a month. I said, two things. One, I hope you'll take me back. I really do want to marry you. And two, I wanted you to know that Barbara had passed. I didn't want you to be surprised by that news. And he said he'd take me back. And then, obviously, we mourned Barbara's passing together. But she really was a catalyst in my thinking about what mattered. She did us a huge service in a way.
She'd be so proud of you now.
Thank you.
I guess she would probably ask you, what would it take for you to run
For what?
for office?
Whichever
one you want.
It would take me being in the right place personally. We have one kid in college, one kid still in high school in her 11th grade year, both of whom have suffered through 8 years of my service under President Obama.
But that's not a no.
It's not a no. And what I might run for, I've thought about the Senate. I've thought about, frankly, other kinds of offices, higher and lower.
Have any of the Democratic hopefuls picked up the phone and called you?
Yes. For advice, not for anything
No,
else.
you're not. Are we going to see your name on a ticket?
No, I can't imagine that. But yes.
Also not a no.
I can't imagine it. I've not endorsed anybody yet, but there's several strong candidates in my judgment that I think would make excellent presidents, and I'm hopeful that we'll end up with one of them.
A year from now.
A year from now.
Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
time. Really appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Adrienne. Appreciate it. Yeah, you make me cry about
I'm sorry.
Barbara
I'm
Frum.
sorry.
Jeez.
Sorry.